I beg you to try it, Patricia.
Let me get this straight, Carla. You disagree on the weapon, you disagree on the number of blows.
Listen to me, Patricia. You were there once in your life.
Hey people, Trish Wood here, and I guess I'll start today with another health update, but I'll keep it short because you're probably bored with me talking about how I'm feeling. So I'm much, much better, and I bet that you can even hear it in the quality of my voice. My head is less clogged. My chest is less sore, and something's really turned the corner. And that's a very interesting idea because I did a little experiment after doing a lot of online research about whatever I had or have, long COVID or just a COVID that lasted a long time. I don't even really know if they know what they're talking about there, but I've been sick since I tested positive for COVID for like 2 months, right? And I thought I was better from the COVID, had a day that was sort of good and then crashed. And it's really weird because what's been happening for me is something I was always really skeptical of. I'm ashamed to say that. Lots of fatigue and the brain fog has been really debilitating for someone like me who spends all day thinking big thoughts. The body pain was very, very unpleasant. And I was waking up with these weird ocular migraines. So that's like a really bad headache on the right side of my head behind my right eye. How weird does that sound? I sound like the world's biggest hypochondriac probably and a whiner, which are things I'm absolutely not. I'm a push on througher, I'm a keep on goinger. But this really knocked me out. And what I found, and this is yet another stackable public health tragedy around COVID, is that nobody knows what to do with this. They don't seem to be teaching general practitioners what to do. Nobody's up on the literature, so it seems. And that's really sad because that means people are suffering and struggling and missing work and feeling depressed, which you do when you can't see the end of an illness, right? That's when the mental stuff really kicks in because you're like, wow, no one's helping me. How do I fix this? And I'm sure my poor spouse and kids are just sick of hearing me whinge and whine. So that's not good. And you want to fix it, but you can't, and medicine can't help you either. So, I did a lot of research, and I will not say what I took that has made this big difference for me in the show, because I'm not going to give medical advice, but I will put out in a document a lot of the things that were sent to me by people who are listeners and very, very dear to have all these wonderful suggestions. Many of them I was doing with supplements, but there's a new piece of this. And when I read the literature on it, people were having recoveries. I mean, this sounds crazy, but almost instantly from it. And I nearly did. I've had 2 days of this, and I get a little bit better every day. I feel like I can see the end coming, even though I don't want to jinx it by actually really feeling that. But I worked all day today. I took a little nap in the afternoon, but it was small. And I was up at my usual time, which is 5 a.m., working on today's show. So isn't that great? There's hope. And the hope is, as always, that we're going to save ourselves through this COVID crisis. And I feel like it's a really important individual victory, especially while the WEF is meeting and they are planning this pandemic treaty that appears to be an absolute nightmare. Let's give the people who really blew the COVID response even more power and take it farther away from the hands of the people who vote in elections for the kind of governance and public health they want. Let's just remove that and give it to the dumb people. I mean, that's essentially what that's a bit glib, I'm sorry, but that's essentially what the pandemic treaty is about. It's gobsmacking, especially given that everything we're hearing now is that many of their policies, including lockdowns and the idea of mass vaccination of people who weren't at risk, were good ideas. They've both been proven completely more harmful than good. And instead of having some kind of an international tribunal to adjudicate what went wrong, they're rewarding them with more power. So my little learning about maybe how to fix this long COVID experience or whatever we're calling it, feels like a bit of a victory. And I'm going to share it with you, but not on the show. I'll share it in a document. I debated whether I was going to talk about the Buffalo Tops Market shooting because obviously the media has taken off and run with it. And I didn't really know what I could add. And then I, out of curiosity as a mother, began to hyper-focus on what might have been happening in Peyton Gendron's young head, that it would come to that. And I started reading things that the media either weren't reporting at all or certainly weren't highlighting in the narrative that has taken shape. So I decided I do want to talk about it. I feel it's terribly important that I speak with you today about some of the things I've learned about what happened with this kid. And, it made me sad. It made me feel, in watching the way this story has played out, and I do a lot of media criticism. There's often the event that's terrible, and then there's the coverage of it in the media that's terrible. And this story exemplifies all of that. Let me start by saying I was devastated for the people in that market who must have been so very, very scared. It's just unthinkable. And I have a lot of grief also for the city of Buffalo, a city I actually love. People make fun of Buffalo, but I love it there. My husband and I have spent some time there at the Albright Knox Gallery, which is wonderful, and we go and stay overnight and go to dinner and really love it. So I feel terrible for all of the people who live there, and especially the Black people who must have been terrified, and the ones who survived and are terrified. So I want to start by saying that my shock was not just at the event, but a rolling kind of nausea I had as I watched how that event was politicized. And I mean in the traditional sense politicized. I mean, Kathy Hochul, the Democratic governor of the state of New York, unelected, showed up on the scene within hours. I mean, I don't think they'd even removed the bodies, and began what was and what continues to be mostly a messaging and propaganda campaign about those events. I know that's a shocking thing to say about something so dire, but someone's got to say it. And this is what I'm going to share with you. They began immediately characterizing this as something that would hurt their political opponent. There was white supremacy obviously involved here, but maybe not in the way that you think. Within hours of it, Democratic politicians and their enablers in the legacy media had already decided what the story was going to be, and it was going to be a story they could hang around the necks of Republicans in America. Imagine that. And here's the other thing that you should think about. In order for that to happen, for them to be so coordinated in their messaging about this absolute tragedy, they must have had a Zoom call. I mean, Kathy Hochul didn't just show up there a few hours later saying what she was saying, which was also being said by everybody else from the Democratic Party and the legacy media. There would have been a Zoom call, right? There would have been a Zoom call. Probably Media Matters, the kind of media arm of the Democratic Party. It says it's a media criticism place, but it's not. It's responsible for messaging for the Democratic Party. They probably would have been involved in that. Kathy Hochul would have been involved in that. The comms people, probably for the Biden administration, I'm guessing, but I bet they were also involved in that because he hightailed it up there soon too, carrying the same message. I mean, think about it. They had a Zoom call or some kind of call where they were coordinating their messaging to see how they could hang this around the necks of their political opponents. That's what they did. That is what they did. So if you go back and look at some of the talking points, you'll see there was a real coordination. That didn't happen by accident. And it really makes you wonder, and I don't necessarily think that other political parties wouldn't have done this. I think the whole thing right now is so disgusting and so contaminated by not serious people who care only for power. And I say that across many Western democracies and political parties. But I'll tell you something, the left has a real grip on this kind of behavior. And they're quite successful at it. That's the other point. They're successful at it. And perhaps it's because they're so brazen about it. So the talking points were all very much allied. And you know who weighed in? This will be interesting for you because we talked about that in the show we did about Joe Rogan and the ivermectin horse paste stories that were going around. Do you remember the Rolling Stone magazine? A guy, I think his name was Peter Wade, wrote a story about, this was after Joe Rogan cured himself of COVID by using ivermectin, part of a protocol. He had other stuff there too. And that, of course, made massive waves because his audience is so huge. And so, of course, they came for him really hard, and they came for ivermectin and this whole bunch of stupid stuff pushed by the CDC saying, or maybe it was the FDA, don't take ivermectin, as if ivermectin was purely a veterinary product, right? Not at all. You get pills, you get it from the drugstore for people. So what happened, just to the kind of the pièce de résistance of absolutely garbage reporting, was by this guy at Rolling Stone named Peter Wade, who wrote a story falsely saying that emergency rooms in America were beginning to fill up with people who'd poisoned themselves because they'd taken the ivermectin veterinary version, which they glibly called horse paste, right? And that other patients coming in with GSWs, namely gunshot wounds, weren't being treated because Joe Rogan had inspired so many people to poison themselves that they'd taken over these. That's what the story said, right? So within a couple of days, the story was absolutely debunked, to use their phrase. It was totally misinformation, totally disinformation, choose one. And even the photograph that they used was faked, right? And this is not just sort of maybe the story wasn't true. The hospital said this never happened, right? He said, no, I don't know where he got this. It didn't happen. So that's Peter Wade. So Peter Wade's name this is very interesting, was on a story in Rolling Stone where the headline was something like, whatever was fueling Peyton Gendron is mainstream thought in the GOP. That was the gist of it, right? So I wrote a tweet about it, as I do, and saying, from the guy who brought you the horse paste, ER story, here is something that is so horrific. I mean, if I was an editor, I wouldn't touch a story like that with a 10-foot pole, right? But of course they did. So, but a couple of days later, they'd switched the byline to somebody else, which is quite interesting. I don't know if it means anything, but anyway, that's my point. Sorry, I was rambling a bit, but the reporting on the story about what happened in Buffalo has been uniformly terrible, directed to make a political point, and misses the other half of the story. So I am not suggesting in any way this wasn't a racially motivated shooting. That should be condemned by everybody on every level. But stopping these things from happening is not going to be fueled by rich liberal donors giving more money to the Southern Poverty Law Center or the white extremist terrorist review organization. It's not. They're not going to solve it. They're not. What's going to solve it is understanding what happened to this guy before he took this act. I read his 180-page manifesto. Absolutely did. But what happens after that is that the shooter is also dehumanized. And people say, well, he doesn't have a right to be treated like a human. That's one way of looking at it. But I want to know what was really going on here. And so I did some digging, deep digging into various news stories and bits here and there on the internet that I pieced together. And this is a story that only half of it has been reported. They're not focusing on the other half. And I think we need to do that in order to have the whole picture here. People are going to criticize me for this. I know that. But I feel very, very strongly that nothing gets solved if we don't tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in these cases. And clearly, the legacy media and their handlers in political parties on the don't want us talking about the other side of the story. So here's the other side, which is not to say that there's another side to make an argument on behalf of this kid, but there is another side to make an argument about what happened to Peyton Gendron, who was 18 on the day he pulled the trigger against those 10 people. So I feel, after having read this, that one of the issues here is loneliness and isolation, and very much the cruelty of high school. And I'm going to read you some things that may blow your mind. The other thing that happened around the time that Gendron was being radicalized was that COVID hit, right? So he was radicalized during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. School was shut down. He was hiding in his basement because he'd been so inflamed by the fear porn. He was terrified of COVID. Not going to school, right? Has no friends, sits in his basement, fearing the virus and scrolling on various dangerous websites like 4chan, which has some of these terribly racist pages. So I just want to read some of these things that I found. This is from his diary. He had a 180-page manifesto, which I downloaded and read. After that, they found a Discord page. It's a server where he was keeping a bit of a diary. So these are his words, right, that I'm going to read to you. So here's what he says. And I want to preface this by saying this. We said, the people who were thinking about what was going to happen as a result of isolation and desperation to kids as a result of COVID policy. No one's going to like me saying this, but I'm going to say it because it played a role here. Now when we see it's an almost direct correlation between what was happening around COVID public health policy, lockdowns, and school closures, and what was fueling this kid's mental instability. I'm not saying it made him go and shoot those people in tops, but it certainly played a role in putting him mentally into a situation where he was vulnerable to this junk on 4chan, right? And he says it. Here is what he says. It's very interesting. He says, I was born 3 times. First one was my actual birth, and he gives the date. That one is obvious, he says. Second one was the day of his first kind of memory, I guess, of being a human being. The last time was sometime between March 15th, 2020, when the lockdowns began, and May of 2020. There I lost myself and a bit of my sanity. I remember I went to my cousin's house with a mask and full getup, and no one else did. And seeing that caused me so much pain. Eventually, it was too much to bear, and I had to leave early and walk home through the woods. I then barricaded myself in the basement for a few days. So he was afraid of COVID. He was upset that his relatives weren't taking it in the same way that he was. So upset that he fled and locked himself in the basement, which is where he was doing his 4chan research. On March 16th, he wrote, "I can't tell you how much I don't want to do this attack. My only other choice is suicide. I can't go back. I have wondered if I'm mentally ill, and that's why I'm planning the attack like I am now." And then he says, "The past 7 years have hurt so much, I think I'm ready to abandon it all." He certainly did talk about suicide a fair bit. So here's a quote from one of the kids who knew him at school. "Most people didn't associate with him. They didn't want to be known as friends with a kid who was socially awkward and nerdy." He'd talk about how he didn't like school because he didn't have friends. He would say he was lonely. Was nobody seeing this? At one point, Gendron's mother called another kid from the school with a request. "Please have Matthew call Peyton because he has no friends." So here is the cauldron, right? The cauldron is lonely, nerdy kid. We hear about lots of kids who get into trouble that they were loners or lonely. I don't know why we're allowing that to happen. Where was the school? Oh, the school was closed. But maybe even if the school had not been closed, they might have missed it too, because they seem to, right? Kids in trouble are left to kind of fend for themselves. Not everywhere, but people knew this guy was struggling. They knew it. He at one point threatened to shoot up, I believe it was the graduation as well, and then kill himself. He was hospitalized for a day and a half, and they let him out. So there's a lot of failing going on here, a lot of failing. And is it failing because everybody was focused on COVID-19? They took him to a hospital at the height of COVID. Maybe that's why they didn't, we need answers about this too. We knew COVID-19 and the policies, these restrictive, inhumane policies, were going to cause huge mental issues for people. And we can't, because just saying that he's a white supremacist is an easy answer, we can't avoid asking these questions too. And if you ask me, it looks like there is a connection. I can't say how big the connection is, but ignoring that connection means we learn absolutely nothing about how and why these things happen. So the point that I'm trying to make here, again, I'm not letting anybody off the hook. Yes, it was racially motivated, but there's much more at play here. And there seems to be very powerful forces at work trying to make us not look at this or discuss this. And you know why? It's because there's a lot of responsibility here elsewhere, right? The hospital that let him go after a day and a half after he threatened to do a murder-suicide at school, why would they let him go? The school, none of the teachers know that this was a lonely kid? Did anybody reach out to try to get him some counseling or some help? He had no friends. That's what people at the school are saying. He had no friends. His mother had to call and make a friend for him because nobody wanted to be seen with this nerdy boy, bright boy, apparently, nerdy. So let's just do a review of what was happening in his life when this thing got going. Fear porn, scaring everybody of COVID. This is a kid who had literally no chance of dying of COVID, right? Terrified of COVID. School is locked down. Maybe it wasn't the healthiest place for him anyway, but probably better than locking himself away in his basement, participating in 4chan chat rooms, right? Not good. The hospital had a chance to save him. He was out in a day and a half. And there were lots of people saying there's going to be a mental health crisis around school lockdowns, but they kept locking down the schools, didn't they? They kept locking down neighborhoods, and all kinds of young people, heck, old people, people my age, were locked away to stew with their demons. So a mental health crisis doesn't just make people with good mental health sick. It makes people who are already struggling sicker. And I believe very strongly, I'm sort of emotional about this actually, that when going forward, when we see these extreme situations happening in the news, roll back, do a timeline. Did this have anything to do with the beginning of COVID? What was their situation in the lockdowns? Were they not in school? We have to start toting up the mental health cost, not just with teenagers who say they're depressed, but with teenagers doing terrible things. And this may well be one of those things, and they just don't want to talk about it. I think we are all, in some way, because we accept massive amounts of screen time. Clearly, I don't mean to be mean, but the parents don't sound like they were on top of it either. It must have been a struggle. I have sympathy with that in my own life. The narcissistic social media that drives teens away from wanting to hang out with the nerdy boy at school. It's not cool. I don't want to put him on my Instagram. It's not cool, right? We have to look at it, and we have to break away from the narrative. And the narrative that you are seeing and hearing and reading about right now is there for a reason. It's political. It was driven by a political party in the United States that is failing, president's failing, baby formula, inflation, gas prices, Afghanistan. I mean, everything is a disaster for them right now, and they're going into the midterms, aren't they? And they're going to get trounced, and they know it. And so they created a script out of this thing. They created a script out of it. And it's harmful. The fact that they are doing this shows, number one, I don't know what kind of people they are. And number two, that there may be a chance for some good and understanding to come out of this later. Now we grieve. Now we're angry. Of course. But they're trying to close the door on that. And of course they are, right? Because the lefty parties were also very, very heavily wanting all of these absolutely inhumane policies that hurt people. That's what they wanted. They wanted them for whatever reason. I'm just going to end with one of the quotes I found today. And I'm not laying this at the parents' feet, but this kid was living in the basement, right? My parents know little about me. They don't know about the hundreds of silver ounces I've had or the hundreds of dollars I've spent on ammo. They don't know that I spent close to $1,000 on random military shit. They don't even know I own a shotgun or an AR-15 or illegal magazines. That's from February. And here's how he ends it. Promise me if you have a child, you will be there and you will be close. Be a friend to your child and make sure they know that you will always help them. Talk about their problems and ways to solve it and never make them feel bad for coming to you. So that's what I have to say about that. I think we all need to do some soul searching. And I'm not letting the people who were warning about these health effects off the hook either, because we all have family and we need to really be paying more attention to our kids. We do. Get them off the screens. Really take their temperature mentally. Don't let monosyllabic answers suffice for connection. And plan more outings where they have to spend time with you and communicate, like out in the wilderness. So they've got to talk to you because they're bored, right? We've got to start doing this stuff, people. And I just want to end that segment by repeating that I'm not in any way downplaying the racist element of it, but that was motive. That wasn't the cause. and we got to start looking at the cause. So that's how I spent my week, investigating Peyton Gendron and the killings at the Tops Market in Buffalo. And that's what we do here. We don't shy away from saying things that may be excruciatingly unpopular. Also coming up today, we have an interview with Daryl Davies, who is a prof from Carleton U. What do you call him? Criminologist. He's a criminologist. And he wrote a blistering piece about how they're treating Tamara Lich. So we're going to talk to him about that. It's really important we understand the politicization of the justice system here. He said that they treated Clifford Olson, a serial killer from the early 80s, better than her. And they're actually right about that. They are right. I mean, they were shackling her, and now they're trying to throw Tamara back in jail for violating her bail conditions. And it's unclear if she did, but it's just becoming a circus of politics around the convoy right now. What was done, I'll say this on every show forever until it's rectified, and they admit it. They lied. The government lied about them. All three parties were involved in that, and got the Emergencies Act that they didn't need. And all the bad stories they were saying about truckers, arson, guns, foreign finance. Oh, it's all not true. Didn't happen. Right? And yeah. So this is, as I say every week on the show now, this was a moment for the country. The protest was hugely important, and the way they responded to it exposed a toxic and ugly crack in the fabric of our relationship with government. I don't trust them anymore because they don't tell the truth. They lie to get what they want, knowing they won't be punished for lying. That's very bad. So we're watching the Tamara Lich case as it plays out around this alleged violating her bail conditions, which seem incredibly broad. They seem incredibly broad. So he's coming up. And then after him, I'm absolutely thrilled to tell you that we have Lydia Perovic, who wrote a great book called Lost in Canada, An Immigrant's Second Thoughts. And I love this book. We're going to be giving a couple away, one to a new supporter when I do my little announcement in a minute. And I'm going to do a random draw for an already supporter for this lovely book. It's about how she moved here with stars in her eyes about what Canada was, what it actually literally used to be, and is now reassessing her feelings because the country has changed so much. And don't we all feel that way? For our listeners elsewhere in the world, this book applies to many, many places, including the UK. So do stick around for our interview with her. It's an extraordinary take she's gotten. She came here with the same kind of stars in her eyes about the country that many of us had up until, let's say, about 10 years ago. And the country has actually changed. And I don't feel Canadian anymore because I don't know what Canadian is. I'm drifting. We're all drifting, aren't we, in some way? Those of us who are awake, which is to say not woke, but awake. So stick around for Lydia Perovic. Brilliant, brilliant lady. Okay, so this is the time when I make a pitch. We don't sell advertising on the show. We might one day, but we don't yet. And we don't block programming either. And I mean, we've done a bit of it in the past, but I never felt good about doing it because, especially during the COVID time, I felt like we were giving out medical information and it just felt wrong to charge people for it. It didn't feel right. So we don't do that either, right? We are just, relying on the kindness of strangers here and hoping that you'll start getting more contact with me now that I'm feeling better, but also just sometimes that the show itself has merit. and that you feel it's worth supporting. I know you're getting hit with Substack subscriptions, and, indie media has gone crazy, and a lot of it's terrific and worth supporting, and you should. But don't forget about us just because we're not blocking you. We really need your support, and we're also very, very grateful to get it. I still, when I see, a new subscriber come in, no matter how small, I'm always a little bit weepy about it. So here's how you do it. You go to trishwoodpodcast.com. There's a button there. It shows our PayPal and our Patreon. As I've said in the past, we may be moving over to Substack or something like that. But right now, that's where you do it. And you can also subscribe on the website, and you will get, if you're a PayPal or Patreon supporter, you will get updates from me on various things, some personal and some more kind of journalistic, and updates on things as they're happening. I'm going to start doing Midweek Meltdown again soon when I'm up to it, and I'm going to be doing more writing for you too. So you're going to get all that stuff just for supporting a show that I hope you feel is worthwhile, because we love doing it for you. We really do. And I love being able to say to you what I've been thinking about the Buffalo story all week. It helps me process something that I was really upset about. Okay. Now we are moving to my interview with Professor Darryl Davies from Carleton University, educated at Saskatchewan and Cambridge. So he's a really smart cat. And he wrote a blistering piece about how they're treating Tamara Lich. So do please listen. He's an important guy with big thoughts, and this should shake you to your core. Hi, Professor. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
You had some very courageous and, in my view, kind of angry words over what's happening to Tamara Lich right now. And I'll just timestamp this by saying it's 10:50 on Friday, May 20th. Is that what it's 20th? Yeah, it's the 20th. Sorry. Just because I think there's going to be another hearing this morning. So some of the information in the interview with Professor Davies might date. But I do want to talk about this. And you wrote something extraordinary, and I felt really excited by it. So please tell me, you said that even Clifford Olson, a story I covered back in the day, was a serial killer was treated better than Tamara Lich is being treated. What do you mean by that?
Well, in all the years I've been working in the justice system, and I worked in the justice system in various capacities over my career, not just as an academic, I have never, ever witnessed a situation where I saw a person who was charged with an offense, brought into court in shackles. And, I was just amazed. I found that absolutely unacceptable, because at the end of the day, people are supposed to be presumed innocent. The cornerstone of our justice system is the presumption of innocence. But what we have at the pretrial stage is the presumption of guilt. And the way these people are treated is absolutely abominable. When we look at cases of wrongful convictions in Canada, and the way some of those individuals were dealt with in the courts prior to the trial as well, is just utterly unacceptable. And a democracy that prides itself on the rule of law, the arrogance, the unmitigated arrogance of prosecutors, and even police in these situations is absolutely unacceptable in a free, society in which we live.
Why is it going on, in your view?
I think this is retribution. That's, pure and simple, that we are taking, we are punishing people. One sociologist referred to it as a status degradation ceremony. It's deliberately intended to demean, diminish, shame, and basically set this person aside and destroy their character and undermine, the person in the minds of the public. That's exactly what it is. By stigmatizing them in this capacity, they are at an extreme disadvantage, because it doesn't happen to affluent or wealthy offenders, but they do target the marginalized and lower class offenders of our society. And that is a serious issue because you are supposed to be presumed innocent. And that should, be the case from the beginning to the end. But that it's not, in reality, it doesn't work that way. Even, for example, in the case of this Tamara, who's, been denied bail and given extreme restrictions on her freedom, is at a disadvantage in terms of the entire justice system, because we know that lower status offenders are more likely, to be, discriminated against as this whole process moves forward. They're kept in jail, for example, as though they've already been convicted. In jail, accused persons can't seek out, evidence and witnesses. And studies have shown that those released on bail while awaiting trial are more likely to be acquitted or receive lighter sentences than those who are incarcerated. We know that affluent offenders benefit all the time through this process. So it's a dehumanizing, degrading, stigmatization process that I believe calls into the very credibility of the justice system. And we've seen this play out in numerous wrongful conviction cases in Canada. If you embarrass the government, if you show up the ineptness of police, what they're going to do is target you. They're going to basically do everything in their power to undermine your confidence. When you politicize a process like we did with the pandemic, and you politicize the courts in this way and our justice system, then the rule of law is no longer credible. And it works, it actually has, just the opposite effect amongst the public who can see what's going on. And this is not justice. This is something else that shouldn't be allowed in a democracy.
Look, I couldn't agree with you more. Certainly as someone who's worked exposing wrongful convictions for most of my life, not recently, but back in the day, I remember when we pursued the case against a man convicted of murdering his wife wrongly in Nova Scotia, and the forensics had been let's just say they were misconstrued or misinterpreted. Let's just put it that way. So that was a big job for us, right? But it was clear. It was absolutely clear he hadn't killed her. It was absolutely clear. His name was Clayton Johnson. And we broadcast the story on Fifth Estate. A filing was made, I believe, the next day. And in the end, Clayton Johnson got out and got a big whack of dough from the province. But we were sued for libel by the police involved, right? That's what happens when you expose these things. So that case went nowhere, and it was resolved. But that you're quite right about that. That's what happens when you challenge the narratives of these cases.
Absolutely. They will take punitive action against you, whether it's in a civil capacity or in other areas. And the prosecutors become the puppets of politicians, and that totally destroys, the transparency, openness, and accountability of our justice system. Wrongful conviction cases have demonstrated that repeatedly. So many times, I think of the case of Stephen Truscott, for example,
yep.
Who pleaded his innocence his entire life. And even when, it came before the courts, one of his biggest criticisms was the fact that they had that information already. The prosecutors did, and did nothing but stall him, fight him, try to prevent pay him any compensation. It just is absolutely a very discriminatory and prejudicial justice system. We claim we're trying to weed that out in our society, but it is evident right, in our judicial system. It's evident in our criminal justice system. And what are we doing about that? Because that, to me, is, the cornerstone of what the rule of law stands for, that we should be presumed innocent till we're proven guilty. But the way we treat people before they even come to court is undermines that. It basically destroys it. And the cacophony of deafness from politicians, if I can put it that way, who are not speaking out about this, is a reflection of just how the status quo will support what's going on when they know fundamentally it's immoral.
I will ask you about Tamara because it seems, I'll just say this, that this really feels like a political prosecution to me. The level of vehemence against her weighed against what she's actually accused of doing is absurd. And I'm wondering if you see it that way, if the system itself now is corrupted in a way that she is being treated in order to kind of underpin a narrative that the federal government really wants to take hold.
Oh, absolutely. There's no question of that. And this politicization is to me, it metastasizes right across the justice system because it's clear what the politicians want. And so the others are just, prosecutors are falling in line. And it is unacceptable.
Was she in shackles? Have I read that right?
Yes, she was in shackles, and as though this person was some dangerous offender, a member of some mob, organized crime. They're treated better in court. People who are, the leaders of Hell's Angels and other, outlaw groups and so on, get better, have more respect, and are treated better than someone like Tamara, who simply did organized a truckers' convoy to support her charter rights. The fact that she would receive an award for that would even be considered a breach of her bail restrictions, is beyond comprehension.
What do you mean?
Well, the fact that, she has been, I read recently where the prosecutor, was going to charge her with bail violation because she received an award for, from the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. I think it was called an annual George Jonas Freedom Award.
Yeah. Because
she accepted that. I just read today that the Crown is claiming that's a breach of her bail conditions. So if you are a person who believes in your charter rights and you exercise those charter rights according to the justice system, and certainly this prosecutor, there appears to be, and some people would argue this, that it's in violation of your bail conditions if you get an award for exercising your charter rights under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This is madness.
Well, I think they don't want her to travel and go and get it. Is that the crux of what they're complaining about? Or I don't think it was. Go ahead.
At this point, it is very difficult to understand at all. And I think for me, whether one agreed or disagreed with the truckers' convoy, we as Canadians have a right to express our freedoms and our views, and we're supposed to have that protected under constitutional law. And if you're the recipient, it shows the great divide between, on the one hand, the government and charter rights in in Canada, because these people were exercising their charter rights. But apparently you can, if it doesn't fit with the government's definition of freedoms and the charter, they'll go after you. And so she's being treated as a heinous criminal, as somebody who is, dangerous to public safety, a threat to our national security, despite the fact that, this country was vilified nationally and internationally for the way in which they responded to the truckers' convoy. A democracy does not operate this way, cannot operate this way, and should not operate this way. And Canadians, rightly so, should be outraged.
So you say that she was treated worse than Clifford Olson. In what sense do you mean that? Aside from the fact that they were paying him money for bodies, as I recall, but right?
Bringing her in, and having her shackled, sends a message, that she's a threat to our national security, that she is the worst type of criminal or terrorist that exists, and therefore we're going to she's not safe. The public safety is in jeopardy because of her, and this is utter rubbish. And but it sends a message out to the public that these people are dangerous people. And again, so where is the presumption of innocence? I mean, the police and the Crown believe, if you're charged, you're guilty of a crime, but you're not guilty of anything until you've been convicted in a court of law. We have due process. We have criminal procedure in this country, and people are presumed innocent until they're proven guilty. And that doesn't mean we can engage in punitive measures prior to the time the case actually goes to trial.
So I'm reading this story from, I think, yesterday, and it looks like they're going after her just because you're right, just because she accepted the award, not even that she'd committed to travel necessarily to receive it, or if she was going to receive it on Zoom. That is unclear. So they're saying that this violates her bail, not on the travel, but on the fact that she, by accepting the award, is furthering her activities in support of the Freedom Convoy. I mean, it's bizarre.
I mean, only in Canada can a person, for example, be charged or claim they violated their bail conditions because they've received an award for, standing up for their charter rights under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This is extraordinary. And it says something about how politics is meddling not only in medicine, but in the justice system. We're at a point here in the 21st century where our justice system is losing credibility amongst the public. And it's for this very reason. Once politicians get involved, and start dictating how things are going to go, then science goes out the window, facts go out the window, and the gatekeepers of the justice system fall into line and just carry out the edicts of the government of the day. And this, to me, is absolutely, horrific. There's no other way to describe it.
Well, I keep kind of bringing up these American examples of how this failed state south of us is now kind of slopping over into bad behavior here amongst our politicians and corruption. And I don't know if you're following the Sussman trial in D.C. right now, but he was the lawyer who was peddling some of the Russia collusion stuff and lied to the FBI about it, and he's being prosecuted. And here's it's just regardless of where anybody sits politically on this, but that's not the point. But in DC, it's almost impossible because it's so democratic, meaning is in the Democratic Party, to get a neutral jury, right? So they've got now 3 people or 4 people on the jury who were donors to Hillary, donors to the party, donors to AOC, all the people who were pushing the Russia hoax like mad, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember I turned to my husband and I said, well, doesn't the defense counsel have like a vote on whether people can sit on the jury or not? He was overruled on these massively, massively partisan jurors. And as you know well, I'm sure the blind hatred for Donald Trump has infected many, many people there. So the idea that this can be happening in broad daylight and that Sussman may get off because the jury is tainted with partisans and it's happening in broad daylight is shocking. And I feel that is coming here.
Yeah, we're starting to see evidence of that. Certainly, the truckers' convoy has wakened up Canadians. I think more and more Canadians are now questioning the integrity, the credibility of our justice system. And the people responsible for allowing this to occur are the politicians.
Yeah, I want to ask you one thing just as we're wrapping up here, too. We've done a lot of reporting on this show about how the underpinnings, at least the public underpinnings for the Emergencies Act, the arson charge, the scary foreign money, which also turned out to be a lie, arson charge not true, weapons at the Ottawa protest, also all the stuff they used to whip up hatred of the truckers and ensure the passage of the Emergencies Act, if it was coming to that, have turned out to be false. They were lies and demonstrable lies at the time. And yet Trudeau got away with that. And what recourse do the citizens have now? What recourse does the convoy have since all of this was not done in good faith?
Well, normally we'd be relying on the courts to ensure that our charter rights are protected in law, that they are upheld. Otherwise, the charter becomes a joke. And the fact that we had, the Prime Minister of Canada out skiing, while everybody was supposed to be in lockdown, it is hypocrisy at its worst. The only option Canadians have is to vote these people out of office. But sadly, elections do not seem to be a remedy to solve these problems. And it is very frustrating. And all I can say is that, the more people that are aware of this, they need to speak out. They need to be demanding accountability from politicians. We found out as a consequence of this truckers' convoy that we're not capable or effective at being able to address a crisis in a manner that's logical, rational, and based on evidence. And we've paid a huge price for that. it has had the pandemic has had a huge and negative, catastrophic impact on the lives of many Canadians in this country. And a lot of the driving or the impetus behind these measures has not been based on science, but has been based on politics. We see evidence of that, of course, in the justice system. And it is, a sad commentary on where we are today. All I can say as a criminologist is that, justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done. And right now, we're not seeing that. And people are losing confidence in our criminal justice system. And that has huge consequences because people will not call police when crime takes place. They will not cooperate with officials. There's lack of respect for politicians and people in authority. The unmitigated arrogance demonstrated by people in positions of power is all too visible to too many people. I think it's caught up with them.
Well, I think it's caught up with them, but until the legacy media has caught up with us,
yes,
they're going to get away with it, aren't they?
Absolutely. When you have media outlets only reporting 1/10 of what actually took place at an event, I find that absolutely appalling, especially when, articles are written that are not factual, that are advancing only the government's perspective. They're owned, paid off, and bought by government propaganda. And when they peddle that to the public, it has very negative consequences for our country.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm scared. I really am.
Yeah.
I will say the trucker protests did two things. It made me hope for my country and feel connected to my fellow citizens in a way I hadn't in quite a few years. And that was the good part. But the bad part was watching the legacy media and Parliament and not only that, but the mayor of Ottawa and also the Ottawa police chief. They were all misbehaving in a really grotesque way, all spreading the same lies. And we live in a world now where lies are told and they meet a purpose. And then when the purpose is over and the lies are exposed, it's like, oh, well, and everybody moves on. I'm like, well, wait a minute. No, you can't, you can't do that. But that's where we are. And you know what? They know it. They know it, right? After the protest was kind of brutally disbanded, a group of media types who had covered it held a conference that said journalism under fire or journalism, something like they were the victims. They'd spent all that time lying about the convoy, or at least, and they're the victims here, including one of the worst perpetrators who I won't name. But I mean, it's just ridiculous. They don't even see how absurd. CBC, of course, was there and they were all there. And one there, well, CBC got a bunch of stories wrong, including the foreign money story, which was the underpinning of grabbing the bank account. That was just wrong.
Wrong. What we're seeing here is the manufacture of news, not the reporting of news.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sad, but that's what it is. And, I, at my point in life, after being in this business for many years, I think like many people, I always felt that, the truth would win out, that facts would.
Me too.
And that hasn't happened. And so as a consequence, we're living in this kind of world and it is a scary time.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you very much for writing that. I guess one thing we can be happy about is that Tamara seems to have pretty good legal counsel now, right? So that's good.
Very happy for her because that's what she needed. And it would have been very interesting if she had been a very wealthy, well-known person, how this would have gone.
Yeah. Well, I went back. I've been reviewing some of the IRA cases as well. Not that the truckers were like that, but it's really interesting because even the IRA terrorists who actually were like killing people got better media coverage than the peaceful Ottawa trucker protests, right?
Absolutely. And in fact, there's an argument could be made for change of venue because I don't think she can get a fair trial in Ottawa.
Yeah. Well, or maybe in Canada at all.
Not at all. Yeah, given the political climate, given the sycophants in the media that have been supporting the government. How can you expect a person to be treated fairly and get a fair trial in Canada's justice system? But one thing I will say, she does have a very competent and good lawyer representing her, and I believe that he will do everything in his power to get the facts out.
Yeah, good for him. I must try and book him for the show at some point soon. I've just been a little under the weather lately, but I think an interview with Mr. Greenspan is in my future. Anyway, thank you very much for doing this. I'm glad you're speaking out so vociferously. It's really wonderful to see, and I hope that more people in your position have the courage to come out and do that, because regardless of where you are on vaccines or the convoy or whatever, what's going on is wrong, and it is slowly corroding and stealing the country from us. And people like you and others need to be public and speak out. What happens to Tamara Lich is a reflection of what could happen to each and every one of us if we're not supporting the narrative. So people need to wake up right now.
Absolutely. And I can't go in and teach students courses in criminology if I think the system is totally and absolutely corrupt. Mm-hmm. And it makes my job impossible. And when students ask me questions in class, I tell them the truth. And it is not easy. And some of them don't want to hear it because in essence, these are young people who have, are aspiring to go on in careers, some of them in police, some of them in law. And to be in a position where I am and I'm teaching them, knowing that the system lacks credibility, makes my job impossible.
Yeah, I'm with you. Anyway, thanks so much for doing this. I couldn't be more grateful. Thank you, Professor. Have a good day.
Thank you so much for having me on the program.
Okay, bye. So that was Professor Daryl Davies of Carleton U Criminology. What a very, very smart and passionate man who understands what we are losing if the judicial system keeps becoming politicized like it is in America right now. Interesting. The Sussman trial is on, as I mentioned to him in the interview, the guy who was peddling garbage about the Russia hoax servers in Trump Tower. It was a total lie, being fed by Hillary Clinton's campaign, of course. But, as I said in the interview, D.C. is all Democrat, and the judge is a Democrat, and he did not let the defense or the prosecutor have 3 of the jury members removed because they were so passionately Democratic, right? So it's rigged already. Like in most cases, when one of the sides in this adversarial situation has a problem with the jury, they have a reasonably good chance of getting them struck off, I believe is the phrase. But no, not in Washington, and not if it threatens the reputation of Hillary Clinton. We don't want that here, folks. And it's coming, right? It's coming. So I want to read you something from Lydia Perovich's book, Lost in Canada, An Immigrant's Second Thoughts. Many, many good things in here to choose from. Over the last 5 years in particular, people running Canadian cultural institutions and media have put all of their chips on irreconcilable differences, meaning between Canadians. There is no Canada for all, no political cause for all, and no arts for all. There is no individual outside ethnic determinism. There are bits and bops of inter-regional and inter-ethnic resentment. What happens to class analysis under those circumstances? What happens to arts, art criticism, the possibility of great solidarity, freedom of expression? She's very, very smart. So here is my interview with Lydia Perovich. Hi, Lydia. How are you?
Not too badly. How are you doing?
Very well. I just want to point out as we get going here that pre the recording of this, we had a discussion about noise. You are in your home near Jarvis Street, which is right downtown Toronto, and I am in my home, which is Midtown, a little bit farther north, and we're both warning the other that there may be noise intrusions from the massive construction project that the entire city has become. It's just unfathomable that they ask us to live this way.
Well, I did write a little bit about this in that chapter that Quillette excerpted, and I dipped into the comments recently to see what's happening. I don't mind development on principle. I just mind that it's all of it in Toronto is concentrated within, let's say, 2 or 3 kilometers square here.
Yeah.
And you probably remember I argue in the book for gentle densification. I mean, I hope we're not going to put your listeners to sleep, but one of the Toronto planning problems is that huge sections where you're only allowed to build single family homes. And then there's this relatively small section when you're allowed to develop, and everything's going on top of each other within the space that you're allowed to develop in. And that's where you get the apartments. The rest of the city is actually getting thinner and thinner in terms of demographic. As the original owners of the house get old and die, and their children move out. So it's a weird paradox, and I do think it has something to do with how this country was built, how this city is built. So I was just slightly provocative too in that chapter that we should maybe try what Paris is doing, what Berlin has been doing, just allow like mid-rises, gentle densification, so we who live in this cursed area where development is allowed are not suffering so much.
Yeah, it's really, my husband and I are, not young, and we found this apartment. We actually lobbied to get it. It took us, a year to get in here, maybe longer. We waited. We had other opportunities because we're a little bit architecture freaks, and this building is as close to living in an old New York building as any place in the city. Yeah, it's beautiful. And we invested some of our own money in it, even though it's only a rental, just because we love it, right? And
so it's a rental. It's actually a decent rental.
Yeah, it's a rental.
Amazing.
And it's huge. It's like 2,800 square feet or something. It's really nice. Working fireplace and stuff. But and we
no maintenance fees.
No maintenance fees. But here's the downside of this is that we are now, what this place was and what the neighborhood was when we moved in 7 or 8 years ago is completely not what we'd committed to. And I feel like we're trapped. Are we going to uproot at our age and move, to Campbellford, which is a town I'd actually love to live in now. But this feels really undemocratic to me, that nobody asked us what we want. And what I'm talking about is not the densification per se. What I'm talking about is the absolutely unbridled giving developers access to all of this land. Every parking lot in Midtown is gone. Many of the lovely old 3-story kind of Edwardian storefronts.
That's the problem.
They're all gone. And so the whole neighborhood is changing in a very rapid way. And so that's one issue. The other issue is that we are going to be living in a construction site. So my life now, and it's kind of funny, but it's actually plays very heavily on my nervous system, is that we are living in constant noise that we cannot escape from, to the point where 2 days ago I was going to go and stay in a hotel. I didn't.
My goodness.
Yeah. So nobody is thinking, what is the quality of life like for these people? How are we changing? And lest anybody want to say that I'm a NIMBY, I would welcome a development for battered women or recovering drug addicts or whatever. I do it, put it in. I'll go and volunteer there and be super happy to have them in the hood, right?
Yeah. Buildings like yours.
Exactly. But what they're putting up here is get this, a 40-story tower at the corner of Yonge and St. Clair behind the Shoppers Drug Mart. Where are those people all going to park?
We either go 40 or a single family home, which is really a city of extremes. It's getting really unpleasant.
Yeah, and we have less and less power to alter the course of it is the issue. 5 years ago, I was invited by Josh Matlow, our city councillor, to attend a very rowdy meeting against developing Midtown, and I spoke there. I've spoken to him since about it, and I don't want to misspeak about him because I think he's essentially a good guy, but he's just basically said to me on more than one occasion, the developers won. So it's a lost battle. They've given up, and we just have to kind of suck it up and be quiet.
I wonder what's going to happen. You remember I wrote a bit about this. I wonder what's going to happen with these towers of 40, 50, 30 stories in 100 years. Are they built to last? I can't imagine that these glass towers are built to last more than, I can see them being replaced by, are they really, what do you think? Are these towers really built for posterity for 200 years from now?
No, well, my husband is an architecture fanatic, and he's kind of a hobbyist, right? And where we live, certainly the buildings they've put up in the last 20 years are already falling apart. They're ugly. They use that kind of, what do they
That's another huge issue. Yes,
right?
exactly.
And they use that terrible concrete. I forget what it's called. It's like pressed concrete or some kind of fake look, and the buildings get dirty and stuff falls off. There were some towers down by the QEW that, cladding was blowing away. Like, these are not built for posterity. They're not built to look good. They're made to make money. And it's, I would say that it's starting to look kind of like the brutalist architecture from Pripyat where Chernobyl was, right? Like, it's just...
Or like really wealthy Middle Eastern town like Abu Dhabi, a city like Abu Dhabi or something like that, where I don't think, it's interesting about councillors that you see about, I don't think a lot of people go out to vote in municipal elections, which is too bad. And it's mostly people who own property that come out to vote. And that is a bit of an issue.
Yeah, I think we're really stuck. Okay, so that's a little bit of a hobby horse I'm on, and I may build into doing an entire show about this. This is an international show. We're heard by people around the world, and so I don't do too much local. But Toronto is emblematic of a larger problem in many, many cities. We are not the only ones that you wake up as a taxpayer and a resident and whatever, and you say, "How the hell did this happen?" The city planners. I suspect there's a little bit of wokeism in this densification movement, are saying it doesn't matter how this affects the people who live there, their mental health, their longevity, their quality of life. We're doing this because it's, for the greater good, which is a phrase that's come to terrify me.
See, I don't know I think there's demand. I think they want fast money. There's huge demand. I don't know why people want to move in, to tell you the truth. I have 4 new 40-story towers in my line of sight from the balcony for in the last 4 years, and 2 more are coming up. So somebody's buying these apartments, and as soon as there's electricity in, I can see people moving. Even the building is half. So there is demand, but I don't think that's a good response to the demand. Like, put us all in these towers within these 4 kilometer squares and go up, 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 up. Build buildings that are ugly. They won't be here in 100 years. I don't know what the answer is.
You mentioned I didn't actually receive the piece you'd written in Quillette, which is from the book. So I've read what you wrote about this in the book, but you said there were comments. What are my fellow citizens in Toronto saying about this very subject? Tell me.
I think I noticed I don't go read the comments very diligently because it would affect my writing. So I don't think it's a good policy to read either good or bad comments. Yeah. But I did dip in, and I've noticed that, there's a lot of the North American spirit. The space is endless. The resources are endless. Why would you live in an apartment? And I was arguing, why would you need a detached house with front and backyard and 2 garages, basically? And so there was a bit of that in the comments. Oh, she's arguing for communist blocks. No, I'm arguing for New York, Montreal, Paris, London, Berlin. London is a bit more like us. I'm not arguing for communist blocks. So it was an interesting cultural difference for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get going here about your book and why I was really, really grabbed by it and astonished that it was written by a Canadian, because I feel so detached from my fellow citizens. I feel exactly, I don't know exactly like you, because I don't know exactly how you feel, but I feel like how you were alluding to your relationship with the country as an immigrant, and feeling it very, very same way as someone who is like 3rd generation. And that is, I feel detached from my country. I feel detached from many of the people who are neighbors and my fellow citizens. And that has been slowly kind of growing over the last 5 years for me. So reading it from your perspective, was really very, very moving for me. So tell me, I guess what I want to set up the book so people really understand what you've done here. It's really a big achievement. Is what is the gist of the message you were trying to send by writing this book?
There are not a lot of countries where you can be agnostic about your ethnicity, about citizens' ethnicity, about religion, about their sex, about various other identitarian stuff, where most countries favor group of people within those. I mean, where we do favor is in language. Of course, we're not entirely agnostic about language. We have French and English. And we have a basic, we used to be interested in our culture and building our culture, but we are not ethno-nationalist. It's one of the few countries in the world where the culture is not ethno-nationalist. It doesn't matter what your ethnicity is, what, to use that word, race is, what your religion is. Although in the religion, there's a bit of a conversation going on. But, it was a promise. It was one of those few countries where you can go and, I thought, just invent your life, create yourself from scratch.
Okay, so just to prove my point, I feel I have to say to you that my experience of the last couple of years has been that it is the working people plus the firemen and cops and all of these types who are going to save us in the end, because they're still kind of being nice to us and to each other. Yes. Right? And they see what's true. They haven't bought into a lot of the nonsense that the media is putting out. And I just feel like you can have this is what the trucker convoy was about, right? You can have a normal conversation with these people. And anyway, so they said yes, and we're going to keep on going.
No, I think I'll just interject and say it's very important for us to keep leaving our house for work and to mix with other people, because the last 2 years have allowed a certain class of people not to do that. So, yeah, I absolutely, and it's going to change us as citizens if we only work from home and never leave the house and don't mix with people who might disagree with us and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think the work from home thing is one of the most dangerous legacies of COVID policy. I would make it illegal. No, I would. You know why? Unless certain circumstances, right?
Yes.
I guess absolutely. I don't mean criminally illegal, but Main Street.
Eccentric, yes.
Yeah, and the financial district here, which is an area I never kind of cheerled just culturally because I'm different from most people who would work for a bank. But those areas, I have all those little stores are gone. The whole little cultural thing happening there's over. And office culture is destroyed. And this is bad. If you're not sitting face to face and making friends with the people you're working with, there's something really wrong. So that's my rant about that. But anyway, I asked you before the drilling started how you got the idea for this book and what is the gist of the book, which is, having read it, is it's sort of essentially about your feeling of having a waning relationship with your adopted country, namely Canada.
So the idea of Canada was the idea of a country that's not ethno-nationalist in any way. It's the promise. Of course, we fail in various ways, but it's the promise, it's the ideal, the fairness, it doesn't matter what your ethnicity is, let's all come together, all kinds of eccentricities and beliefs and oddities and income levels and projects, and just make a Canadian project. And that's changed. I think it's become important what ethnicity you are now. Another thing that brought me to...
what do you mean by that when you say you think it's become important what ethnicity you are now?
I suspect people have noticed underrepresentation of certain ethnic groups in certain professions, for example. So now you would have, instead of using other tools to address that, now you have job ads specifying ethnic group that the employer wants, which is highly, highly unusual for me. Maybe I'm a naive liberal of the old school kind, but that's a little bit of weird. Yeah. And I do a lot. I always have extra jobs in addition to writing, and I think it's good for writers. So I constantly apply for part-time jobs and contracts, and I spend a lot of time on nonprofit job boards and Indeed and that kind of stuff. And I've noticed the increase of like preferred ethnicity in job ads. Just quite unusual for me still.
So keep going. Sorry, I interrupted your train of thought.
Yes. Another thing that attracted me to a big city life in Canada itself is you could write about culture. You could be an arts and culture writer. There's journalism for that. You can be an art critic and make half a living or make a living. There were opportunities. It's a lively media scene, lively arts and culture scene, country that took interest in its own culture, that discussed it. And unfortunately, that is on the wane too. I think arts journalism is almost completely gone. There's maybe 3 people in the globe who still write about arts and culture, and a couple of specialist magazines. And I used to write about opera a lot. And on a good year, like 80% of my writing income was about opera. So now in 2022, when music journalism is decimated in Canada, not in other countries, the US still has it, European countries still have it. It looked like, wow, that was really another era. So of course, that's probably a global movement, what the internet did to journalism and arts journalism. But as I mentioned, the other countries have found a way to not destroy their ongoing talk about their own culture. And I think we've abandoned it. So
and why is that a problem, Lydia? You know, why? Because I think, you know, that Joni Mitchell song, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. You know, I like opera. I can sit through it, and there's certain pieces of opera music, obviously Nessun Dorma, which everybody knows, but are things that really move me and are important. And I didn't read opera criticism, but I will also say, or opera writing, that part of me knows it's important to be doing it. Like, even though, like, I think having a vibrant culture is partly that the people who maybe don't partake of it still support it being there because they know it's a very important thing.
Yes.
And when you pointed those things out in the book, I got a bit of a chill. But so that's my kind of answering that question. But I'd like to know from you, why is it important that I would say try to maintain, but even maintaining based on what you're saying is most of it's gone. Why was it important back in the day to have a vibrant bunch of thinking people writing about a culture, even if it's culture we don't particularly care
Exactly. So, of course, the cliche is that journalism is the first draft of history. And I think the arts journalism is the first draft of our cultural history and our arts history as a country. And that's why it's important how we react to things. What does this mean in the culture with this new thing? I mean, another even more important thing probably is we train some of the best artists in the world. And I don't say this lightly and just to compliment my own country. Our opera singer training is extraordinary, and very few of them can make a living in Canada. So we actually train these brilliant young opera singers that live in Germany, make a living in Germany. They live in the US, they travel around the world. Some live in the UK.
Yeah.
Some, of course, from Quebec. A lot of Quebec singers work in France. And it's similar, unfortunately, with other branches of culture. It's becoming like that in literature. I know a whole bunch of people who just don't even bother setting their fiction in Canada anymore because they're just going for American markets. So the large publishing houses are pretty agnostic about where you set your books. You can set them in Baltimore, you can set them in Massachusetts. It's even better if you do, because that way you can sell film rights and all that. So it's a bit of a, so we have these, I mean, we've told these young people, this is a viable way of life, being an artist or being an arts worker, because arts have a huge number of arts workers, stagehands, producers, stage managers, front of house, that kind of stuff. It's a whole economy that if you want to make their argument, makes a lot of money to a city and to a country. And that's all going to be petering out as the arts and culture become invisible in the media. I mean, if you look at our dailies and at the CBC, there is a lot of American movies content in there.
Yeah.
And a lot of Netflix, a lot of Disney Plus. And some of it is really excellent writing. But that's a neighboring country's culture. And nobody's even aware of it anymore. It's just, it's just relevant for us. We're just going to talk about it.
Well, it's definitely slopping more and more across the border, especially as America becomes more dysfunctional and right. And in my view, it's a failed state. I just think it's a failed state. And that's what we're watching. We're watching the end of it.
It's getting really weird.
Yeah, it's getting really weird. And so it's kind of more fun, right? Like there's, nobody, I mean, how did Joe Biden even get elected? Clearly he's senile. He's made mistakes on every single policy decision he's made. He's been caught in a million lies. His kid is corrupt, right? He's surrounded by apparatchiks who are maintaining a presidency that's literally destroying the country. So that's pretty fun. Like, get the popcorn. We want to watch that, right, in a cynical way. Sadly, some of the more dysfunctional elements of both American culture, which I think is debased right now, forgive me for not, loving some of the, the naked women doing twerking dances that now make up what our kids are watching, but call me old-fashioned. But also sort of the political dishonesty and extremism. It's all washing over here, and our media, which should be a bulwark, right, is exploiting that, in my view.
Big time, big time. It looks like a lot of countries in the world want to be American so much that they want to adopt American problems as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'd have, after the murder of George Floyd, you have Black Lives Matter support marches in countries that have nothing to do with the U.S. racial situation. I mean, even Britain. I read a good article this morning on Unheard, which is a British media outlet.
Yeah, I love
online.
Them.
Aren't they great?
Yeah.
About how the British Black population has very little in common with the American Black population, and how that whole vocabulary just spilled over and, dare I say, colonized back Britain and British political life. And so now everybody's doing in the UK what's the US is doing. I mean, Canada is even worse. You can observe that from Canada, just from the top perch.
Yeah, well, you say colonized. I would say corrupted even. I did an interview with James Delingpole, who's pretty funny. I don't agree with him on everything, but he's really a keen observer of British life. And he said that there were, I believe it was him, it might have been C.J. Hopkins, but I think it was Delingpole who said that there were rabid, aggressive Black Lives Matter protests on the Isle of Wight, like this place where there's like literally like no Black people, or maybe two,
strange.
And they're happy, right? So it was kind of a mind virus that scatters very quickly through, social media and media more generally. I think coupled with legitimately the horror of watching that man die, in living color, with the cop staring right into the lens and completely ignoring the people who were saying that, Mr. Floyd was in terrible trouble. That also is something that I think it made people.
That is a good point. No,
right?
Yeah, that was a horrific thing to watch. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think it made people go crazy. But I also think what happens now in those circumstances, and we certainly saw it with Black Lives Matter, I'll just say it based on what's coming out, is that people move in to take advantage of that trauma. And I think in Canada and Isle of Wight and all these various places where people were overreacting, spurred on by some Black Lives Matter rhetoric, it was because as human beings, we all saw something we needed to make sense of, or at least atone for, or do something about. And I think Black Lives Matter kind of extorted that, and companies too, insisting their employees have Black Lives Matter stickers on their,
yes.
They did.
Corporations making statements. I know.
Right. It was so dumb. And sadly, what that did is it kind of negated the actual human goodness that attended the reaction to those events. People were really upset by it, obviously. And,
I think, that's a fascinating point that you make. And that's one of the better defenses, actually, that I've heard of. Why would somebody in my country of origin, Montenegro, have a BLM march? Which is, you argue that people everywhere recognize the noxiousness of that impulse to just step on somebody's neck and murder them if you have that power. Yeah, I get that. That's completely right. But it came with this American vocabulary that's completely foreign to most of the world. Absolutely.
Well, and defund the police, right? It's the stupidest thing ever said by anybody.
Goodness.
And now they're paying for it. But I will also say, look, I am a known now Justin Trudeau, I won't say hater because that's a bad word, but disliker. And look at, the Black Lives Matter in Canada was not particularly misbehaving the way they were in the States.
No.
But he took a knee to a group that was still burning buildings, right, in the States. He took a knee to a group where members had called for the killing of white people and cops. Like, he took a knee to that. So that's sort of the other side of it. There's the good-natured going along with something and a conversation that people wanted to finally have, and then people like him and others exploiting it for their own political gains, right?
It was very strange to see political leaders in other countries taking the knee. Which is so strange. I saw a picture of Keir Starmer, the new Labour leader in the UK, in his office taking the knee.
Yeah.
Like, do they realize how absurd that looks?
Clearly not, right? Clearly not. They don't. I think I do feel there are people who are really seeing the absurdity of some of this stuff, and that the people who don't actually don't see it, or they're so cynically exploiting it that they don't care. Right?
Could be either. Yeah, it's true.
But let's just get back. I love what you say about culture and arts. And so I want to tell you a story and get your response to it. But someone near and dear to me had an employee who was Muslim and who came in to work with a little prayer mat and needed breaks 3 times a day to go and pray, which were granted. Of course you can, right? But you know what else he brought to work every day? Skates. And it was such a beautiful metaphor, right? He wanted to be Canadian. And so he wanted to learn to skate. And so he would work a shift, hard shift, doing his 3 little Muslim prayers every day. And then he would strap on his skates and go to the outdoor rink in this neighborhood because he thought that was making him more Canadian. I thought, oh, I love that. Someone write a poem about that.
That is lovely. And I did also take up skating in my
did you?
In my vintage, and I'm still learning. I'm not great at. I mean, from a Mediterranean country, we don't do. It's not part of the basic literacy, skating. So I had to take it up in my middle age, and it's embarrassing and also lovely. Both of
and
those
the symbolism, like my son, who's now 22, played no contact hockey at Forest Hill Arena. And that was also really fun for me because there was a lot of parents showing up. There were Orthodox Jewish kids I don't think the kids have the curly cues. Maybe they do, but they maintained with their hockey uniform their commitment to their Orthodox Jewish religion. And there were kids showing up in turbans, and it was just great. Like, they all want to play Canada's national game to be citizens, right?
Yeah.
And it was lovely.
But of course, sometimes religious rules and regulations clash with the laws of the land. And in those situations, Canada used to kind of find like a general law of the land respect. Like, there were always exceptions. Like, if you're Amish, you were allowed to kind of step out of certain laws on some occasions. And I mentioned that in the book as well. Was Canada ever liberal in that way, that we all have unified laws for everybody? Because I think it started really respecting difference profoundly from the 70s and 80s. And then it will allow, like, okay, in this particular case, okay, you can do your own religious thing if that makes you... as long as it's not clashing, let's say, with the Charter of Rights. But now it's completely different. Now there's a bit of an acceptance that all the laws are fair to question, You can choose what to respect, what to not respect, depending on your ethnicity, depending on your political cause. I mean, the last 2 years, both right and left decided, oh, we don't like these laws. We're not gonna respect them for a bit. And then they would make their point, and then they would be policed away. So I like how the truckers were policed in Toronto, for example. It was a fun, noisy festival. And then around 9 or whatever, the police just escorted them out, and that was that. And they were back. And then, so that's more Canadian to me than, for example, a 3-week siege or smashing, burning churches towards quote unquote reconciliation. Or this was for me, Canada. You can be the weirdest self during the day, and then at night, the priority of the noise bylaw takes place, and everybody's going to go get up, stop the noise. And, so there was this negotiation. That was always Canada for me. Yeah. But that's kind of fraying now. And I don't think a lot of us on either side of the political spectrum is believing in the common project, is believing in this great solidarity across the spectrum.
But that's really interesting. You would say that after kind of criticizing the trucker protest for being as long as it was. You and I are diametrically opposed on that, right? I think that was an extreme example of how we're actually losing freedom. And I've reported a lot, Lydia, on how much of what was said about the convoy has been proven subsequently to not be true.
There was a lot of nonsense, yeah.
And that the Prime Minister used the lies, as did both political parties, in order to help get the Emergencies Act passed. So that's got to be dealt with, but it's not. But anyway, so let's just agree to disagree on that. That's fine. That's the Canadian way.
It's true. And I don't remember the Wet'suwet'en protest when the rail tracks were stopped. And I wasn't a fan of that at all. And you have all these middle-class people in Toronto with their annex homes cheering for the...
I know. I know, but not cheering
allowed,
for
right?
the truckers, right?
Exactly.
It depends on the narrative.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I would say that I would cheer for the Wet'suwet'en and for the truckers. Like, I just think some things are worth really being a pain in the butt over. And I wonder if the protesters in front of Ottawa had not been truckers, but had been protesting some more racial type of issue, if the Prime Minister would have come out and shaken their hands and blah, blah.
Yeah.
So that's a very, very complicated thing. For me, it's black and white, because I think something was lost in the Emergencies Act, the way they dealt with it. And I pray that it will be exposed on a national scale. But the mainstream media isn't picking it up because they helped the government spread the lies. The arson story was an absolute lie, and the cops knew it from day one, right?
That was silly.
Absolutely silly. But anyway, that's another, I do a lot on
It's true.
Yeah. So
but I just want to add, I mean, the Ottawa police finally had done what it was supposed to do and just did its job. And it's then that they introduced the emergency, which was bizarre.
Yeah.
Like, you really didn't have to do that. But I guess we don't know all the, I don't know. I'm remain agnostic. I don't think it was a good idea, but.
Yeah. So let's keep going. So you mentioned, or you used this phrase in the book that I absolutely loved, which is blood and belonging, right? And I have had, and ironically, given what we were just talking about, it was the reaction to the truckers and the removal of the truckers that created what might be a final rift between me and my relationship with this country. That is how deeply aggrieved I was, that people representing the idea that we should be able to talk about things, and that mandates that, for
you can question them.
That all that, like, bringing down the power of the state in that way on nonsense, without any kind of real pushback from the media, it did end my sense of belonging to a country of people who were reasonably like-minded on the big issues, right? And I think propaganda is one of the big disseminators of this feeling of distrust by people like me. So I don't feel I belong. And I have discussions with people all over the world, Britain and America and here too, who say, I no longer feel connected to where I'm living and want to go somewhere. So we're all planning, to get an island like Doomsday Preppers or something, right? Which is kind of, that's hyperbolic silliness. But there are a lot of people feeling that way since COVID too. But I think it began before COVID. So tell me what you mean by blood and belonging.
So let's take an example of land acknowledgement. I think we like this fantasy of knowing who the original inhabitants are and that they were good versus us who are bad and corrupt.
Yeah.
That they knew how to preserve nature somehow instinctively. And with all our science, we don't. That they were not greedy humans the way that we are. So there's this kind of weird fantasy about pre-contact. Now I'm going to get triple cancel Canadians.
Yeah.
That it's kind of black and white. And maybe that's it. I don't know what fuels it. I think lack of history and lack of trauma actually fuels it. Lack of constant through the centuries of trauma kind of fuels this fantasy of a better us that was somewhere there, preceded us, and that we need to get in touch with it. And they have that other side of us has an uncomplicated relation to the land and is there justly, and everything is right. And I think, of course, that's anybody who's read any history of anthropology knows that that's just a fantasy. So this stuff about it's very strange how the Canadian progressives and liberals are patronizing the indigenous populations. Somehow they are seen as fundamentally different than everybody else in Canada. Mm-hmm. So all of us are in this messy table. We're jostling, we're negotiating, we're corrupt to different degrees. We're fallible. We're trying to figure it out. It's a mess. And then there's a special clean table for people who are part Indigenous or quarter Indigenous or it's impossible to. Again, another fantasy is that we can tell with certainty who is really, really, really purely Indigenous. So, of course, there's a bureaucratic procedure for that, how you get your Indigenous status and all that. So that's gotten really sharp in the last few years. And I can't explain it, why Canada is so invested in that difference. And a lot of people now talk about Canadians and Indigenous people. Well, while we used to talk about Indigenous Canadians, now you can hear a lot of rhetoric in very important places, in many meaning-making institutions, that it's Canadians and Indigenous. There's no great solidarity. And again, that's really weird and new to me. And then there's this ongoing strange, and nobody explains. Of course, there's the other thing is nation to nation. What do you mean nation to nation? I mean, somebody who's come from a state that fell apart in civil wars, where there were every bit of land was contested. Who was first? Whose uncle was murdered by whose grandparent? Yeah. It's incredible. That's very, very strange to hear to me. That nation, we're discussing nation to nation, and we're renegotiating what are you guys doing? Yeah. It's so easy to lose a country. It's so easy for laws to be broken and then just never taken seriously again. It's so easy for something that's been built by several generations to be destroyed within one generation. And people who come from really tough spots with really tough histories can remind Canadians this. And they shouldn't be playing with, and then trivializing the words like genocide and fascist and racist. Like everybody you disagree with on Twitter is racist. Do you have any idea what a fascist is and what genocide is? Rounding up people of a certain ethnicity to camps and murdering them. I wouldn't use it for cultural genocide. I wouldn't even use it for that. So it's this hankering for trauma, for history, for us to feel something dangerous. I don't know what it is. I cannot explain this Canadian investment in this irreconcilable difference between Indigenous and settler.
It's a very I agree with you completely, and I think you're very brave to say it because people are afraid to say it. I have a long history of reporting on I still call them First Nations brothers and sisters, and
Exactly.
I probably always will, because that's how I feel about them. But I've been to Grassy Narrows. I exposed a story about the mercury poisoning, our big investigative show. I saw the kind of abandoned hope, all ye who enter here, living experience. At that reserve, I met a guy named Matthew Beaver whose life had been ruined by exposure to mercury. I never forgot my interview with him in his pickup truck there. It was extraordinary.
How did that happen? How did the poisoning happen?
Do you know about the Minamata poisoning in Japan? There's actually a Johnny Depp movie about it right now.
Oh, no.
Hang on, I'm just Googling who the company was in Grassy Narrows.
So it's basically
of the poisoned river.
So it's like Erin Brockovich. There's a corporation, and
I believe it was. Let me just Google to get this absolutely right. So there's always this reporting, right? Grassy Narrows to get $68.9 million more from Ottawa for Centre to Care for People with Mercury Poisoning. Imagine that. And there are still signs warning polluted water. Here we go. 6 decades after tons of mercury were dumped into the Wabigoon River, Grassy Narrows First Nation has reached an agreement with Ottawa for $68.9 million more in funding to build a home that will care for people experiencing the health impacts of the chemical. Okay, it came from the agreement announced Monday comes nearly 60 years after mercury from a Dryden pulp and paper mill was first dumped into the English Wabigoon River upstream from the Northwestern Ontario First Nation. It was an absolute disaster, and the government handled it stupidly. They sent them, of course, they couldn't. The issue with Grassy Narrows was that they couldn't hunt and fish anymore. That's how they'd been living reasonably happily. And the losing access to the river and the fish in the river changed everything for them. And also being poisoned changed everything for them. And so, it was a very traumatic place to visit. Obviously, the trauma is more theirs because they're living it, but it certainly opened my eyes as a liberal white journalist to actually see what had been done. Yeah. And the government's response was just to send them freezers full of whitefish so they didn't have to fish. That's basically how it was like ridiculous. Anyway.
Extraordinary.
Yeah. So my point is that when I see these kind of symbolic but empty gestures of these land acknowledgements and the orange T-shirt day and all this stuff, and I say to myself, I'm not wearing the damn shirt. If something needs to happen, tell me what needs to happen and exactly. Let's make it happen, right? These things are never about actually doing anything to help our First Nations brothers and sisters. They don't. The T-shirts don't do anything. The land acknowledgement does nothing. So it's all of this, as you say, drama and theater to make us what? Are we self-flagellating here? Like, what are we doing? If they need our help, I will sign on to anything that will help them. I would never deny anything that would actually help them, right? But that's not what we're doing here.
Yeah. And I agree. I mean, I make this make this proposal in the book that we actually have a lot in common, but across income and opportunities line. So if you look at a bunch of the immigrant population and a bunch of the First Nations population, we have a lot in common when it comes to opportunities, when it comes to ECDEV, when it comes to belonging to a culture. But nobody in Canada is arguing for that kind of solidarity. Because this kind of thing that you described, I mean, that happened in Westray Mine in Nova Scotia, that happened all kinds of people who live in small places, outback places, working class people, low income people have suffered in this way in many ways. And unfortunately, it's not exclusive, but of course they are, I think, extra vulnerable, the First Nations.
Yeah, and my experience has never been on an individual basis that there was ever really an issue on the multiple encounters I had as a reporter. So I don't know what this is about, but it's not useful. And I don't think it's helping anybody.
And it's the fact that now such populations will stop considering themselves Canadian and think of themselves as something outside the mainstream. It's not going to help.
Yeah.
That is not going to help. So it was interesting. The reaction to my book it was mostly a huge interest in libertarian, conservative, center right. The odd liberal is interested. Progressive side, which is most of my friends, left of center, left liberals are not saying anything. Their media are not really taking interest. And I think it's a big mistake that the left and the left center are making by abandoning the issue of national belonging, of what the Canadian project is, of how do you love your country productively. Nobody talks about it anymore. There's nothing wrong with being proud of your nation even. But Canada was always good in that it was the idea of a nation was never tied to a particular ethnic. I mean, it probably was when it was British Empire, but for a long time, it was not tied to a particular ethnicity. And there are ways we can talk about it. There are ways we can talk about this great solidarity, but nobody dares do it. And it's something people should think about. I don't know what it takes. Maybe the media should do something about it. What do you think?
I think that the media is incapable of it. I think most of them in the legacy media have been captured by a mind virus, and that, you can't, loving your country or loving things about your country, people are finding now here and elsewhere in the UK too, is considered nationalistic, which is a bad word. Nationalism is a bad word. Populism is a bad word. And so, we cannot argue outside the narrative, which is that, Canada is essentially a country with its own original sin, and we're all terrible, and, we shouldn't get along, and
ongoing genocide.
Yeah.
I think the Prime Minister said that one.
Yeah.
I don't think he's a serious person.
He is not a serious person. And here's the deal, Lydia. If he really feels that, what's he doing about it? Right?
Excellent point.
Like if there literally is an ongoing genocide of First Nations people, what is he doing about it? Nothing. He's doing nothing about it. So stop it. Be quiet. I interviewed his brother. I don't know if you heard the show, but his brother is a really interesting guy.
Really?
Yeah. And they're very, very different. And we talked about Trudeau's motivation, and he said, and it made me think about because of the WEF, which is going on right now, or about to go on. And he said that he just loves the trappings of that life. That is his primary motivating influence, is the motorcades and all that stuff, and I'm starting to feel like it's true, because
the theater. Yeah.
Like he was a drama teacher. He's not a serious person. He is not a serious person at all, right?
That's my impression. Yeah,
that's true.
Well, it's interesting what you say about nationalism too. I mean, 2 decades ago, when I became Canadian first, it was the left that had all the discourse of nationalism down pat. Remember, like Mel Herdig's and Maud Barlow's, and the NDP was quite nationalist and critical of free trade agreements, and we were all down. No, that's all gone now.
Yeah.
And I mean, some of it's good that it's gone. It was a lot of parochialism and anti-Americanism, which was not founded on anything. But this wasteland it's even worse, I think.
Yeah. I wonder what switched for them. I'm going to, at the end of the show, play a clip of what I believe was Jack Layton's last big media appearance, where he steps down because he's too sick to go on. Because I'm trying to figure out. I lived in Riverdale. I had a house there, and then I moved to Leslie. I had a house there.
She was your MP?
Well, yeah. Jack was my MP. He was also a peripheral friend, socially a friend. And Peter Tabbins was our MPP, and Paula Fletcher was my city. So it was an NDP trifecta there back when that was actually a good thing, right? And I was wondering, you know, I liked and admired him very much. Not everything, but I thought he was a reasonably admirable
Decent guy.
guy,
Yes,
and worked
absolutely.
for him and voted for him, right? And so I went back this morning before talking to you to review some of the things he was saying and doing in the time before he was too sick to partake anymore, and trying to figure out where he would be in the time we live now. You know, he was a champion of work. He called them working families. I'm old enough to call them, you know, the working man still, and
or working class, or working people.
class.
Yeah,
yeah. And I still have, that's kind of my focus in life, right? If I'm trying to make things better, but he called them working families. I wonder where he would be today, where, you know, the New Democratic Party, Jagmeet Singh is such a divisive force in this country. And it's clear he loathes working people because he thinks they're all racist. And I wonder where Jack would be in this. I mean, I do know someone who's pretty close to Olivia, so I know where she sits on this stuff, and it's not good. But I wonder where he would be. You know, have you thought about that?
Yes, I thought. I mean, my intro to Canadian poli-sci was volunteering for my MP. Wasn't even a citizen then, couldn't vote, but they let me volunteer. It was a great, smart decision. Alexa McDonough in Halifax, and
Right.
she was the NDP leader back then.
Yeah.
And it's when I started looking at the history of the NDP, which is fascinating moments, absolutely fascinating. Tommy Douglas against the War Measures Act, the Medicare in Saskatchewan, the weird social method people like J.S. Woodsworth, Agnes MacPhail. They were full of fascinating characters and ideas. And I often wonder now, what would they have said to what's going on, to the complete identitarian takeover of the NDP.
Yeah.
I mean, I get their, I haven't voted for them in quite a few elections. I get their house, what are they called? Householders that go to every house before every election. How they describe every candidate, it first start with identities, traumas, neurodivergence, and then political ideas.
And
why are you doing that?
Yeah.
And that it does reflect. I mean, maybe they tinker that towards that because it's downtown Toronto, but no, it's a national problem. And I don't think Jagmeet is avoiding American culture wars in any way. I think he thinks he can make, and the party can make some hay from that. And I think that's a really, really bad idea. I think the NDP federally and provincially used to stay well away from American culture wars.
Yeah.
And I don't think, I mean, what would Tommy Douglas? I mean, I looked at the clips of Tommy Douglas. He had some crazy, I mean, he of course thought that homosexuality was a form of mental illness. And that's perfectly fine. It's his time. And he was a Baptist.
Yeah, but that's how people thought back then.
Exactly.
You can't do this retroactive punishing of people.
Absolutely.
You know, they weren't enlightened times. That's what people thought. I'm sure he would be enlightened today, right? So,
absolutely. And the ways to expose the people to different forms of life. I mean, he'd have friends now probably that are gay. It's not a big issue. He didn't have anybody in his life who was gay back then, and so he could infer whatever theory was available that that's the correct one. And I know David Lewis. I know that Stephen Lewis, I believe he's dying. He's in his last days, or he's very seriously ill. So he's not very politically engaged. But unfortunately, Abby ran on a bunch of identitarian stuff in BC and didn't get in. So Abby's not a good sign. Naomi hasn't touched the identitarian side, but she's very American. She only deals with American issues.
Well, Jagmeet, I kind of went after him a bit on last week's show, and rightly so, when he was surrounded by those angry people in Peterborough last week, and it was a big hoo-ha. What they were saying to him was, why did you lie about the truckers? Perfectly good question. I disagree with how they did it. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm sure he felt scared, and I feel bad about that. But you know what? His response was to say later that they were threatening his life, right? In that moment. And I went through all the tapes. I didn't hear it.
It's politicking. Yeah, of course he wants to benefit
default,
from,
right?
yeah.
This is what it's like the American, my life has been threatened by these Trump supporters. I mean, that's what they do. And this is, for me, the most dangerous thing that can be happening right now. The country is already kind of, riven with all kinds of shifts and
Yes.
breakups of relationships and political alliances. If that's his, I actually don't think Jagmeet is all that bright either. I'll just say it. But if that's his default position always, that it was a racist event and that he was threatened without proving that,
that's not a good approach.
it's not a good approach. It's just it's making and it's kind of the crux of your book, isn't it? Right? I don't feel, I used to be able to say about most politicians, unless it was maybe George Bush while he was trying to sell the Iraq War or something really cross about something obviously dishonest. But I don't assume that leaders I don't agree with are evil people.
That's key.
Right?
That's key.
And now in Canada, like there's a columnist named Andrew Coyne, who is making a living from character assassination of the truckers, calling them, he actually called them hillbillies in a headline, right? And yeah.
I'm surprised. I'm surprised because he should be more subtle than that. We know his own class background. We know that he's very upper class.
Yeah. He lives in my hood, so I see him. I know what he drives. I know how he dresses. Yeah.
And occasionally I like reading his stuff, but a lot of the times I would disagree. And there's a degree of haughtiness. Mm-hmm. There's a degree of haughtiness. And he's a guy who's been a columnist all his life. It's extraordinarily unusual. You paid probably six figures all of your life to just opine. And there's something really, I don't know, pampered about this kind of life. So I think he should just have just a smudge more of self-consciousness, right? So I wouldn't, and there was also Stephen Marsh. I don't know if you've noticed Stephen Marsh's piece about the truckers' protest in Toronto. He says he viscerally hates these people. Like he really wrote that. And I'm thinking, okay, even if you feel that, do you think that's a good idea? I mean, and we know all about his class background. Married to Sarah Fulford. The worst adversity of his life was, being late on a bill or something. It's extraordinary.
Not getting a good table at Soto.
This is it. It's
right?
a better.
Soto. Yeah.
Soto Voce, exactly. Yes, or Soto, whatever it's called.
Yeah.
But just think about what you're saying. I am surprised that the NDP didn't at least try to look for a better approach when it comes to the truck protest, and in general the whole COVID restrictions things. I mean, somebody who drives a truck on his own doesn't interact with any. Why would they be forced to vaccinate?
Well, and the thing about the truckers, though, too, which is sort of interesting to experience, like I did go to the Toronto trucker protest.
Yeah, I did go along the line too. Yeah.
It was so fun, and everybody was happy, and
it was joyous. It was mostly joyous. Yeah,
totally. Like it was so great. And here's what I think happened, Lydia, because no one expected it, and I think it's why I'm so defensive about them. That when they started across the country, and I was talking to Tamara on the show frequently, and Chris Barber too, and I was watching the growing support, the Mennonite ladies on the side of the road who baked cakes or whatever. There were nuns, it was just a huge cross-section of Canada across the prairies, with farmers. And it was just it was so great. And everybody was so happy. And the money, of course, was pouring in massively. And I think that just scared the living daylights out of the people in Ottawa who thought, you know what? Like the riffraff are getting rowdy and we can't have that. We can't have it. And in the face of all of this really wholesome protest, wholesome motives, what is coming from Ottawa from our Prime Minister? Oh, they're racist. Oh, they're Nazis. Oh, they're this or that. And in fact, all of Parliament, to save a few Conservatives, were spreading this terrible libel against these people. And I just think that, well, that was the first time I felt hopeful for the country for a long, long time. I liked them personally very much and believed in the sincerity of what they were doing. And
well, how did you react when they found those guns?
So that's a really, really good question. So when I saw the story about the guns, which was not in Ottawa, by the way, right?
In Alberta. Yeah.
Right. It was in Alberta. So those people were not the Tamara Lich, Chris Barber people. She didn't know those people. She wasn't in charge of organizing. It was an organic event that sprung up on its own. And I want to see, I'm not denying that it happened. I've seen the pictures. I'm sure they found guns, et cetera, et cetera. But I am so now skeptical of the way the media has covered all of this. I mean, they have literally gotten every single point wrong that I want to see. Who are these?
You lost trust.
Yeah, I've lost trust. Are these guys who brought the guns there for a bad purpose, or are they people who have guns, as some people in the prairies do, and I don't know. Not excusing it, wish it hadn't happened, and want more information. And if what they are alleging, which I'm not even sure what they're alleging anymore because it's kind of died from the coverage, right, is true, then obviously they should be prosecuted. But that was a completely separate event. You know, that was not happening in Ottawa. None of that. And actually the RCMP had to walk back, and this is on tape, that there were any weapons found in Ottawa at all. There were none. They implied there was not one, and he actually says that, I believe, under oath. So no guns, no money laundering, no money going into their accounts by the Proud Boys or whoever they were alleging. Yeah. None of that was true.
What about the border crossing? Didn't that make you queasy a little bit?
You mean that they were blocking the border?
Yes, and stopping the train, stopping the truckers themselves.
You know what? I love that. I love that. And I'll tell you why.
This is where my history and background comes to be. I don't like when the laws are not respected. Yes, go ahead.
And I agree with that 1,000%. I actually do. But I've been a COVID. I was a science journalist at CBC for a while and covered a lot of pharmaceutical products liability cases, and I understand science pretty well, and I know how to read studies, and so I've been skeptical of both the lockdowns and the efficacy of vaccines almost since the beginning, and so we've done a lot of reporting on it on this show, and I've watched how and of course everything we reported was true, right? The efficacy is not what they said. There's more concern about safety with the vaccine, especially with kids and myocarditis, et cetera, proven fact. And
it kind of prevents hospitalization and death. So basically keep yourself out of the hospital.
Exactly.
It doesn't prevent spread. No.
Yeah, right. So if it doesn't prevent spread, then why are you mandating it for people? Point is, you're saying you can't use it to fly, or you can't fly without it, but that means that the implication is that you will infect people. But the vaccine doesn't prevent that anyway. So that's one thing. But the other bigger thing for me, Lydia, is just that it was clear to me and many, many, many other people, and some esteemed, hugely credentialed people, that the lockdowns were causing more harm than good too, right? And I by the time that the convoy got going, I had been marinating in the dishonesty, right, and the damage done, the people the lockdowns killed, the kids who weren't going to school, the suicides, the drug overdoses, the missed cancers, all that stuff. I'd been marinating in that. So for me, having a guy like Chris Barber and someone like Tamara to say enough already, they're not listening to us and they're not following the science, right, was a big moment. And then seeing kind of the multiplicity of the people involved in the movement, it became very important to me. And so, I didn't love that. I guess I did love they blocked the borders. I wanted, I wanted people to really take notice. The media was shitting on them. They weren't reporting about them honestly. And so, I guess I did sort of support it. I did support it. I thought maybe strategically it was not a good move because people get mad. And that certainly wasn't Tamara's ruling that they should block the border. That was a separate a group.
Yeah.
But I do feel they were desperate times. And, today's bad behavior, look at, just to be philosophical, I mean, look at Bobby Sands and the IRA and 10 men dead, right? They were blowing people up one minute, then they had a hunger strike. Now the IRA is basically running Ireland democratically, right? Or I don't have to tell you about it.
Hopefully not.
Well, no, but you get what I'm saying, that people who are involved in a struggle, and I'm not in any way equating the truckers with the IRA at all. I'm just saying that people who do things like that out of desperation when the world is unfair, we can come to respect later in hindsight. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Definitely in some cases for sure. What's interesting to me is that it came so late. It came really late when the mandates were just being struck down province by province. And I had really hard 2 years. It was really hard. I didn't like lockdowns. My livelihood, my writing income's all gone. People who work in the arts that I know, their livelihood completely gone. People have started seeing each other as vectors of disease. People stop mixing with each other, stuff that we talked about. And of course, the pajama class didn't mind, and the rest of us who had to go out, whose life was going out, going places, writing about places, talking to people, being with people, and people who don't have large families here. Like I'm here on my own. So if I can't interact with people outside my apartment, it's going to be really strange. Yeah. So luckily, Ontario didn't have curfews, but I was shocked to see that some provinces had introduced curfews in these last 2 years. Zero science behind it. It's strictly authoritarianism. And I was surprised that nobody protested that. Yeah. Like, come on, people, Quebecers are good at protest. Why aren't you out on the street raising hell after 9 p.m. because the government told you, no, you're not allowed to leave your house at 9 p.m. There's no scientific reason for it. You're just not allowed because we'd like to manage you. Or yellow tape around children's playgrounds. That was really bizarre. For the whole year in Toronto, you couldn't get your kid outside to play because even after we knew there's no COVID on surfaces and the children are not dying, yellow tape on playgrounds. You couldn't go to watch cherry blossoms. Couple of years. Yeah. We can't have that. Like, it's so much bizarre, unscientific, authoritarian overreach. And I was hoping something was going to happen during. Let's do some. I mean, had Ontario introduced curfews, I would have been breaking law. And that was my, Well,
you're hell to die on, right? Like,
it's incredible. Yeah. So yes, it came a bit late. I totally understood the frustration. By the noise of them in Toronto just absolutely thrilled me. It was during the day. Yeah. It was a dead, silent city for about 2 years. Yeah. We were compliant. We were okay. Let's just go through this. And to hear that noise at that street festival, it was kind of moving. Yeah. And I was happy that it ended how it ended. Yeah. It didn't turn into a siege, and that way I could kind of support the protest completely. So I totally get it. That it spilled out the way it spilled out, that there are some weird people on the fringes. There are some weird requests from some people within what was one of the requests? Resign, entire government should resign and the power should go to Governor General. Some weird ideas. That's just normal in an cacophonic protest. There's all kinds of people. There's going to be weird people. There's going to be okay people. There's going to be sane people. There's going to be all kinds of people. But to go back to the NDP, I'm shocked that they didn't at all recognize the working class aspect of that whole protest.
Yeah, that was shocking to me. Well, and so the media focused on Pat King, who's this kind of a weird dude. Yeah. But they said he was the leader. That's absolutely not true. Tamara was running the show and he was kind of along for the ride. And yet the Fifth Estate focuses on him. It was mind boggling for me. So.
I'm sure there are people who claim they were leaders.
Yeah. Well, he was sort of on the periphery of that, but But I don't mean to speak for Tamara, but I do know that she was kind of laissez-faire in a good way, because she sort of believed in not being authoritarian in her own leadership, right? And so maybe she should have been more with him and said, Pat, stay off the mic or be quiet or go home or whatever. But, in a fair world, he would not have been the focus of what was happening there. But they chose to focus on anything that was, look, there was like a jillion bad people affiliated with all kinds of protest movements, including Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
And I would think it would be unfair for them to focus. There was a young woman in Toronto, a Black Lives Matter leader, who said, I'm praying that I don't kill white people there or something. I didn't react to that. She's a young kid. She's over-enthusiastic. Do I think she's like a black terrorist? Absolutely not. Right? But if the shoe had been on the other foot, of course, the CBC would have done a big investigation of her as a black nationalist or some weird thing, right?
Yeah. I don't know if you listen to Mike Pesca's The Gist. He used to be at the Slate then. Because he quoted a title with the N-word, he got fired, and it was like the whole witch hunt. Anyway, The Gist is now his own podcast, continuing successfully, his own teams. So he has a daily show, and he had a really excellent show about how the media cover protests that the journalists agree with versus protests that the journalists don't agree with. And so it was a great case next truckers versus, let's say, BLM or some other case, how differently the media have approached those truckers, and where was actually more violence, where was actually less violence and property damage. It's no, you have a point there. Absolutely.
I'm just looking here at The Gist.
I think it was a couple of months. I can send you. Do you have show notes? If you have show notes, I can send you.
I don't have show notes, and I feel bad. I'm going to start doing show notes.
That will be lovely.
That's what I'm going to do with show notes. We haven't done it, and it's not fair really to the listeners. I sometimes will do some follow-up information for our paying subscribers, but I think I probably should just start doing. So let's get back to you and your book, because I don't want to miss on any of the points. You tell a very, very interesting story in there about trying to volunteer and how difficult. And it's so funny because I was saying to my son last night, I really want to be a reading coach for kids who have struggled because of school closures. I'd be good at it. I love reading. I love kids. I don't have any grandchildren, so I would love to be around young kids, right? And I probably can't do it because I'm unvaccinated. So there'll be a barrier there. But my struggle to volunteer kind of reflects yours too. Tell me about what's happened.
Well, a lot of these organizations have bureaucratized beyond what their mission is. So you'd have to, some have such bizarre training processes. And for example, Big Brother, Big Sister, I went through that training. It was intense training. It's intensely intrusive. Of course, you have to, because it's a police check of everything. And then because, of course, they have a surplus of women volunteers to match up with littles, you're put on a waiting list. And also they have a surplus of downtown volunteers versus the outburbs where actually there is the highest demand. You put on a waiting list. So people should tell you early on, we really need men because, there's a lot of boys who need a male figure in their lives who don't have it. Somebody who is going to take interest in their education. He's going to just hang out, And so they have this, you learn this a bit later by getting trained. They have a deficit of men who they can match with boys, and they have a surplus of women who, not enough girls who would need this kind of mentorship. So that's one of the things. Another thing is I won't name them. It's another adult literacy school. It's like 2-day anti-oppression training. And that would kill every desire in you. Plus, it was I used to work full time back then, and I couldn't take Friday off. You are presumed to be able to take a whole day off Friday and then a whole day on Saturday to be trained in anti-oppression ideology. And this is just to sit with somebody once a week and read. And so these things are so absurd, so absurd. But then again, depends on what fulfills you.
Yeah.
So I think I found something recently, and I think I'm
good.
sticking to it in adult literacy.
Oh, good.
And
good.
I'm enjoying it. It's with the Frontier College, and so far it's wonderful. But they're doing everything online. So I've been urging them, let's just meet in person again. Yeah, maybe we will.
Is that connected to Zosky's legacy there? Because I know Peter
not sure.
Literacy was a big thing with him, and he had some kind of I think he left money for some. It may be actually Frontier College. It may be, yeah.
This is a very old institution, apparently from late 19th century, and it's fascinating to see what they've been doing. They have stuff all over the country. A lot happening in the Northwest Territories, a lot happening in remote places, and it's been an honor, really. But why I mentioned volunteering so much in the book is that's one way you integrate yourself into society when you don't have your own family.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, the best way for integration and rooting is you have kids. And so the kids, bring their own friends, bring their parents. They get you involved. But if you remain without children, then it's a whole different procedure. So I've been chatting with a lot of my female friends, and some have kids, some don't. And people who are now in their 60s plus and their kids are leaving, and me, we have things in common. Because now they have like 20, 30 more years thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do now?
Yeah. Yeah, I want to just, we have to wrap up in a few minutes, but I do want to ask you about another theme in the book that made me sad. And I intuitively knew it was true. And that is a sense now of aloneness and lack of the ability to naturally kind of create relationships with other people in this country. And you know what? That is so true. You were really, really spitting fire on that one. It was so smart. And I intuitively knew it. And then you said it, which I guess is the value of art, right? Could you just talk about that a little bit for me? Because I think people will really relate to it.
I think, unfortunately, that in big cities in North America, I don't know what's happening in smaller cities, but I think in big cities, the friendship, the institution of friendship, the skills we need for it, the virtues we need for it, that's on its way out. And I think a lot of things die out, like playing music at home, for example. That used to be very frequent. Everybody used to have a piano and bring sheet home and sing and play. That's gone. So sometimes things just disappear. And I think that friendship, there's no room for friendship anymore. And I think we make friends up to maybe 25, 26, 27. And once our lives start settling, there's simply no room for new people. So, of course, that can be fine if you grew up in the country and you haven't gone far away. Let's say you grew up in Toronto, you're still in Toronto, you know a lot of people through your parents, grandparents, or friends, or exes, or that could work fine. But if you're completely new in a city or in a country and you have to start everything anew, or if you're a student in a new city, or you retire and go somewhere else, if you're an individual going to an unknown environment, it's going to be really hard. And I don't think economic conditions favor the making and maintenance of friendships, because we're so career focused and family focused. There's absolutely no room. I mean, just look at your lives, dear listeners. You work full time, you commute, let's say you commute an hour or two, and you have your family. There's no time left for anybody else. I mean, you can meet a friend, quote unquote, once a month for lunch, or once every 2 or 3 weeks. And that's about it. But that's really not friendship. We shouldn't honor it with the name of friendship. It's kind of friendly. It's a pal. I don't know. What do you think, Trish?
I think you're right. And I think there's two things going on. I think that the language that politicians and the people governing us use is purposely divisive, and I think it's working. I also believe...
There's that too. Yeah.
Right? I do believe that. I mean, I have remarkable liberal bona fides, right? But I'm sure there are people I used to work with at the CBC who hear me talking the way I talk now and think I'm racist. So was I racist then too? You know, or have I become racist? A person, they absolutely know has no capacity for that. But all of a sudden, because we're on the other side of a whole bunch of really important arguments, I'm racist. Like Wendy Mesley was racist for doing what she was accused of doing.
That was insane.
It was completely, and I know her. I know her. That should never have been allowed to happen.
That was just insane. And her apology, she should never have apologized.
Oh, I was so depressed. I wish she'd, really kind of held the line on that.
Yeah.
I mean, and for people who don't know, she's a big host at CBC when I was there, beautiful and talented and kind. And she used the N-word not to say the N-word, but rather to talk about someone else.
Citation. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, come on. And a junior person.
In a staff meeting. So not on air, in a staff meeting. Yeah.
Staff meeting. And a junior person. See, there's empowerment for people who don't normally have that kind of power in a newsroom, and clearly they shouldn't, right? Who complained to her. I'm assuming that the person who complained, this young woman, was racial in some way.
I think there was a couple of people. Yeah.
Couple of people, and Wendy was humiliated for it. So, and then apologized for it. I don't think she should have.
This is it. Nothing happens backstage anymore. Everything's now in the open. You have to be humiliated. And she retired. She didn't go back to that job anymore.
Yeah. Well, who would? So that's one reason I think that we're not making friends and that we're alone. And I think the other reason is just that we're so used to isolating now from COVID rules and things that we are out of the habit of being social in that way. So
that's made things really worse so much. And I think you make a good point. Politically, these political divisions are on top of all of this. We have political divisions. Our friends need to think exactly like us on every single issue so that we can hang out with them. That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, and but I've seen this happening too in the UK, where pub culture was really a bit of binding glue in some of these small country towns.
Exactly.
And that's all going, and nobody's lamenting it. Nobody's lamenting the glue that holds citizens together, because somehow we should all be part of a big globalist blob. And if you think those things, you're a terrible person, right? So I hear that there is now construction starting again in the courtyard behind my apartment. So we're going to have to say goodbye.
They were patient, yes.
They were very good. I might actually take them out of coffee or something, but to say thank you. But thank you so much for this, Lydia. I'm going to give your book away to a couple of listeners as well.
Oh, wonderful.
And here is the sad story of giving books away now. I have to actually buy the book on Amazon because the shipping is free, right? I had a couple of free books from publishers that I was going to send out. And we did send some out, and the shipping was like $22 a book, right? The book itself was maybe
probably less than that.
Yeah. So I figured, somebody said, well, stop doing that. Start buying them from Amazon and use your Prime membership to get free delivery.
Oh, I see. Okay. I was going to suggest we can send you, but I see now.
No, but I still have to pay the shipping, so there's no point, right?
That's crazy.
Yeah. So I'm going to do that though, because I really want people to read this book, no matter where in the world they are. I know there's a lot of talk about Toronto, but Toronto is a template for a lot of stuff going sideways right now. And I'm sure that people will see their own city and their own life in some of the things we've talked about. So Lydia, thank you very much. I'm super grateful.
This was such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye.
That was Lydia Perovich. And as I said earlier, we're going to be giving away 2 copies of the book. One to a new subscriber on either Patreon or PayPal. And one we will randomly pull from our current subscribers and send it out with our best wishes and a note from me. I said in the interview with Lydia that I've been contemplating Jack Layton a lot, especially given Jagmeet Singh's behavior. I've been dumping on Jagmeet a lot. I don't know the guy. He's probably a lovely person in many ways, but they're all caught up in this game of identity politics right now, and it's so unhealthy for the country. And I wish that he would rethink this as his default position every time he's challenged on something by white working class people. That's what he's doing. And not to mention the smearing of the truckers. Remember when the truckers was first happening, I was thinking, what? Oh, Jack Layton would have loved this. He would have been, and would he have been? I don't know. But what's happening now is not the New Democratic Party, which for those of you internationally, you might not know, it's kind of socialism light, if you can believe that was my jam. But back in the day, it actually meant something. I was for workers' rights and loved our healthcare system, which has been trashed by COVID, zealotry, and many, many other things, the media, et cetera, that have made me move way far away from that party. Couldn't be farther away from that party, actually, right now. But back in the day, it actually meant something. And Jack Layton was a man with pretty incredible integrity. He was liked by everybody. His funeral was a huge, huge deal. And so I do wonder if he would have been able to resist the woke mind virus that seems to have infected many, many people in his party and in the Liberal Party too. Wow. And some conservatives. So, it made me think about him. I was reviewing some of his speeches this morning and things he'd said, and I found in the archives, this might have been the final speech he gave. I don't know if it's true, but he gave it on July 25th of 2011. And he's stepping down because he's too sick to go on. And boy, he is so thin in this. He's very thin. He died a month later on August 22nd, 2011, at the age of 61. Oh, tragedy. Very, very good man. I just want you to listen to this. I thought it would be a good kind of meditative exercise for us all to listen to Jack Layton in the last kind of media appearance he gave.
Well, good afternoon. On February the 5th, 2010, I shared with Canadians that I, like 25,000 other Canadian men every year, had been diagnosed with prostate cancer. I have received overwhelming support from my loving family, my friends, my caucus and party, and thousands of everyday Canadians. Their stories and support, I have to say, have touched me deeply, and I've drawn strength and inspiration from them. In the closing days of the most recent session of the House of Commons, I started suffering from some stiffness and some pain, and after the House rose, I undertook a series of tests at Princess Margaret Hospital here in Toronto. My battle against prostate cancer, as it turns out from these tests, is going very well. My PSA levels remain very, very low. However, these tests, whose results I received just last week, also indicate that I have a new cancer, non-prostate cancer, that's going to require further treatment. So, on the advice of my doctors, I'm going to focus on treatment and recovery. I will therefore be taking a temporary leave of absence as leader of the New Democratic Party of Canada. And I'm going to fight this cancer now so that I can be back to fight for families when Parliament resumes. So to that end, I've requested that the president of our party, Brian Topp, consult our parliamentary caucus and then convene a meeting of our party's federal council to appoint an interim leader. The interim leader will serve until I am able to resume my duties. I intend to do that when Parliament resumes on September 19th. I'm also making a recommendation on who the interim leader should be. I suggest that Hull Aylmer MP Nicole Turmel be named interim leader during this period. Ms. Turmel enjoys unanimous support as the national chair of our parliamentary caucus. She's an experienced national leader in both official languages, and she will do an excellent job as our national interim leader. Let me conclude by saying this. If I've tried to bring anything to federal politics, it's the idea that hope and optimism should be at their heart. We can look after each other better than we do today. We can have a fiscally responsible government. We can have a strong economy with greater equality in our society, greater equality that's so important in days when we see inequality growing. A clean environment. We can accomplish these things. We can be a force for peace in the world. As I am hopeful and optimistic about all of this, I have to say I am as optimistic as when I started out my life in politics. And so I'm hopeful and optimistic about the personal battle that lies before me in the weeks to come. I am very hopeful and optimistic that our party will continue to move forward, that we will replace the Conservative government in a few short years from now, and that we will work with Canadians to build the country of our hopes, of our dreams, of our optimism, our determination, our values, and our love. Thank you very much.
So one thing I know about Jack Layton is that he did love the people he called, working families, the working class. Those were his people, and he was absolutely sincere about that. He rode around town on a bicycle. He was a very authentic guy in many, many ways. And I wonder today how he would have behaved in Parliament, listening to Justin Trudeau trash the truckers as racist, misogynists, Nazis, all the stuff he did. Would he have challenged him? Would he have said, no, as Canadians, we don't do that? We don't smear people and libel people that way? I hope so. I think he would. I hope he would. I think he was a great loss. And maybe he was the last of his kind. I'm not sure. But we've got to rethink where we are now, folks. That's absolutely key. And I think listening to the show, you'll understand that. It is it all sort of interconnected, I guess. But we do have to rethink where we're going. It's not working for people. It is not working for people. The divisiveness, the othering of people, the constant harassment of the unvaccinated, the maintaining this vaccine apartheid on a product that doesn't even prevent transmission, and shaming people. I mean, calling your opponents racist as your first line of defense instead of actually defending your policies. That Trudeau doesn't even defend his policies anymore. He just says racist. That's what he does. And he seems to get away with it, right? This cannot stand. It cannot go on. It's not what this country is about. It's not what America's about. They're doing it there too. Less so in Britain, but there's a little bit of it there. And so we need to rethink. And so we will, because I'm going to read you something to think about, which are he wrote a letter to be read at his funeral, which was read. I don't know if Olivia read it or not, but here it is. I should know that, but I've forgotten. My friends, love is better than anger. Hope is better than fear. Optimism is better than despair. So let us be loving, hopeful, and optimistic, and we'll change the world. All my very best, Jack Layton. We're not doing those things, are we? Stay critical. See ya.